Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this session is entitled Major Power Influence and Regional Security Architecture. Without further ado, we'd like to invite our moderator, Tan Sri Razali Ismail, Chairman, Global Movement of Moderates Foundation on stage. May we now invite our distinguished speakers. His Excellency, Dr. Ng Eng Hen, Minister for Defense, Singapore. His Excellency Sway Alpay, Deputy Minister of National Defense, Turkey.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for taking up all the seats in this room. I have the pleasure of being the moderator of the two ministers we have, two very distinguished ministers we have for this afternoon's discussion. I would like to welcome the distinguished minister from Singapore, Minister of Defense. And the distinguished Deputy Minister of National Defense, Turkey. The subject is, the theme of this Putrajaya Forum for 2016 is regional cooperation in addressing security challenges. This is, as the Prime Minister said just now, this is an issue that is occupying the minds of a lot of people in every region in the globe. So we are taking into account the concerns that have developed in the context of regional cooperation and the structures that have been with us and how we are going to deal with these structures. Are they still relevant or not? If I talk about Turkey, obviously Turkey holds a hugely pivotal position, historically, geographically, and as it stands now in that part of the world. Turkey tries, if I may say so, tries to effectualize its national imperatives in the context of the structures that are attendant in that area, taking into account NATO, taking into account the presence of Russia. And of course, what is going on, the turmoil in Syria and Iraq, and the offshoot of that, bringing in thousands and thousands of refugees and migrants into Europe. In the case of Singapore, we are concerned about what has happened all over the world. But over the years, Singapore and other members of ASEAN have been able to operationalize many of the cooperations that are almost taken for granted in Southeast Asia. Singapore can be credited for its long, far-sightedness and pragmatism that has made them being able to again effectualize their national interests, at the same time being able to take into account the presence of major powers and the interest and their own interests. I think this afternoon you're going to have two very distinguished leaders of their region who will be able to clearly provide what is in store and how they look at the security perspectives, and as well as all the other things that have taken place. The Prime Minister spoke about non-traditional elements. There's plenty of that in this part of the world too. By and large, ASEAN, Southeast Asia is more familiar with pluralism, pluralistic society, heterogeneous societies than perhaps any other part of the world. And we are also familiar with how we have dealt with major powers before, and on the basis of that experience, it is possible that we will be able to work constructively with major powers in dealing with their interests and our own interests in this world, in this part of the world. So may I now stop talking and give the floor to the Honourable Minister from Defence. Please, sir.
Many thanks, Tan Sri Razali. First, let me express what a pleasure it is for me to be on this panel, together with my Turkish Deputy Minister of National Defense, Shri Alpay. Let me also thank Midas for inviting Singapore to the 4th Putrajaya Forum and the wonderful hospitality that is always very warm in Malaysia. This is my 3rd Putrajaya Forum, and it's always an honor to address this community. I'm well aware that we have security experts here, so I don't intend to give a panoramic view of the security challenges. It would be redundant, but instead focus on a few key points for your consideration. And I propose for the next 15 minutes or so to focus on ASEAN, because as Prime Minister Najib eloquently said before me, the ADMM, the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting, for all intents and purposes, is the regional security grouping for ASEAN. ASEAN is home to over 622 million people, a combined GDP of US 2.6 trillion. Last year, ASEAN celebrated the establishment of the ASEAN Economic Community, a major milestone in our regional integration. As a region, ASEAN has experienced strong economic growth in the recent 2 decades. With the 3rd largest labor force in the world, a booming middle class, and huge potential in productivity gains, ASEAN is projected by some experts to become the world's 4th largest economic zone by 2030, not very far away. In the security arena, the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting, or the ADMM, has also made good progress since its implementation 10 years ago. Prime Minister Najib talked about how he was the defense minister when the 2006 ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting was inaugurated. And since then, ADMM has embarked on cooperation to build confidence and capabilities in areas such as humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, maritime security, peacekeeping, and crisis management. Yet, despite this progress, I would remind us all that the ADMM is still relatively very young as a regional security grouping when compared to, say, NATO or the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. I think it will do well for ASEAN in this stage of development, the ADMM, to learn from the strengths and weaknesses of other groupings if we want ADMM to continue its important work in strengthening defense ties between its neighbors, between its members. Indeed, history teaches us that not many regional groupings have withstood the test of time to remain intact or relevant. Those that have succeeded have done so because they're able to anchor their organization deeply on a set of goals and principles. These goals and principles provide for the common good of all and are able to withstand or surmount episodic challenges by continuing engagement between the members and with other partners. The OSCE is an appropriate example, the Organization for Security and Cooperation. I remember just this January, when I attended the Munich Security Dialogue, how the German Defense Minister, German Defense Minister, said to me how that as she looked back and how the OSCE had evolved, how it went through different periods of security environment in Europe, how very glad she was when there was issues in Europe that this organization provided a platform. And as many of you know, OSCE was born during the Cold War with the objective of improving relations between the Soviet bloc and the West. It was founded with the signing of the 1975 Helsinki Final Act, a non-binding agreement, but which laid out 10 guiding principles. Principles which include, among others, respect for sovereign equality of its members, refraining from the threat or use of force, and peaceful settlement of disputes, much of which is in our ASEAN Charter as well. When the Cold War ended, the OSCE seemed destined for irrelevance. However, the OSCE continued to renew itself with new charters throughout the years by building on these 10 guiding principles. Today, the OSCE, with 57 members, is more relevant than ever before and enhances Europe's security by tackling contemporary issues such as arms control, human trafficking, and terrorism, arising from recent events surrounding the Crimea and Ukraine. The mechanisms and the platforms of the OSCE were useful in allowing its members to continue their dialogue, even when questions were raised with regard to adherence to the guiding principles of individual members. Thus far, if I can come to the ADMM has been guided by principles enshrined in two major instruments, namely the ASEAN's Charter and the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation of Southeast Asia. While these instruments have served us well, I believe that on the occasion of the ADMM's 10th anniversary this year, it is timely for the ADMM to establish a set of key principles specific to defense cooperation within the ADMM. Some may ask, why is it necessary to have key principles beyond the general aims of ASEAN? I believe that for security communities, principles are necessary because they provide clear boundaries so that the common space is delineated. Initiatives that fall within this space can be actively pursued, while initiatives that transgress boundaries can be more easily identified and early before they cause unhappiness and discomfort among member states. Let me illustrate with an example which, again, Prime Minister Najib touched on. Straits of Malacca. The Straits of Malacca initiatives, if I can stir your recollections, began in 2005. It was actually at the Shangri-La Dialogue that this issue was discussed. At that time, piracy was an issue in the Straits of Malacca. Some of you may have forgotten. But it was such a problem that Lloyd's deemed the Straits of Malacca as a war risk zone and raised insurance premiums for ships passing through the area. To address this issue, there was consensus on 3 principles for maritime security of the Straits of Malacca, and these principles were reached in an informal setting of Shangri-La Dialogue. Namely, the primary responsibility lies with the littoral states. The international community organizations, such as the IMO and major user states, have a role to play, and any measures taken must be in accordance with international law and respect of the sovereignty of the littoral states. Some of you may say these 3 principles are no-brainers, but the very fact that they were articulated gave comfort to the international community, set boundaries of responsibility and sovereignty for littoral states, and if you like, provided the framework, because these principles articulated the clear lines of primary responsibility, articulated the out-of-bound markers for individual states, as well as space for member states to provide assistance. They, in fact, laid the foundation for an overall framework where all members were clear on how they could contribute or could not. These principles were also translated into tangible initiatives for cooperation. It was Prime Minister Najib who proposed then the proposal for joint air patrols above the Straits of Malacca Straits, and this led to the launch of the Malacca Straits Patrol Eyes in the Skies initiative in September 2005. Singapore believes that similarly, a set of principles for ADMM will be timely in this stage of our development. And I would again articulate 3 principles for consideration. First, the ADMM shall respect the independence and sovereignty and territorial integrity of each ASEAN member state, even as we build the ASEAN community. This includes deployment of the militaries of individual ASEAN member states, because it must be clear that while we operate or cooperate in partnerships, sovereignty of nations should never be compromised. As an example, this principle would give assurance that even if ASEAN supported any security initiative, it could not assume or override the authority of that member state in the deployment of its security forces. Second, cooperation shall be on a voluntary, non-binding, and flexible basis. This is important, this principle is important because there may be specific circumstances when all ASEAN member states can reach an agreement as the interests of individual countries are aligned. But there could very well be instances where there are differences, and this provision allows members to observe their individual rights and obligations. The third principle, we must maintain an open and inclusive regional security architecture with ASEAN at the center. We cannot tackle many of the security challenges that we face today by ourselves. We must be ready and willing to work with partners from around the world who also have a stake in the security and stability of our region. The Straits of Malacca, the South China Sea are clear examples. These 3 principles that I've just articulated are not new to any of us, I'm sure. Neither are they exhaustive. They have in some form or other been captured in ASEAN documents such as the ADMM joint declarations, but nonetheless, articulating them specifically provide clarity and predictability for ADMM and regional partners. Besides principles, there ought also be common goals and objectives for the ADMM and our partners. Let me suggest 2 important areas to focus on. First, we need to enhance regional peace and stability through dialogue and practical cooperation. Here I'd like to report that the ADMM Plus in particular, ADMM Plus, 10 plus 8 countries, has achieved significant results by fostering mutual trust and practical cooperation to tackle non-traditional security means. Let me give you an example. The ADMM Plus HADR and military medicine exercise hosted by Brunei in 2013, who was then the chair of ASEAN, brought together all 10 member states and 8 plus countries. It was a very substantive exercise. It involved more than 3,000 personnel, 7 ships, and 15 helicopters. We are extending this as an indication of our commitment to practical cooperation. 4 ADMM Plus exercises will be conducted this year. And I'm happy to report that approximately 18 naval exercises and 20 special forces teams have already committed to the maritime security and counter-terrorism exercise that Singapore, Brunei, Australia, and New Zealand will co-host next month. We should also explore new areas of cooperation where we can continue to work together. For example, the ADMM Plus is now considering a new expert working group on cybersecurity, which will help to raise our abilities to deal with one of the more urgent security threats we face today. Second, we need to come together to create and abide by a common set of mechanisms, protocols, and norms that guide behavior in this region. A common set of mechanisms, protocols, and norms. This will help diffuse tension as well as reduce the risks of miscalculation and mistakes. We should quickly conclude the Code of Conduct, which our respective government leaders have agreed on as the most important deliverable to reduce tensions in the South China Sea. Meanwhile, it is important that we keep channels of communications open. I'm glad that Brunei is now putting the finishing touches on a direct communication link for all 10 ASEAN members, with a view to expand it to include the Plus countries. During the 3rd ADMM Plus in Kuala Lumpur recently, Singapore suggested expanding the CUES, the Code for Unplanned Encounters at Sea, which was promoted by China in the 14th Western Pacific Naval Symposium in April 2014 to include queues for white shipping, coast guards and fishing vessels, as encounters, as we know, take place between them and military vessels. Regional navies can work towards creating a code of conduct to guide submariners on maneuvering to prevent accidents during an unlikely encounter. We can also establish rules of behavior to regulate air encounters between military aircraft, similar to the ones established between China and US in September of 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, together these principles and goals will help the ADMM and the ADMM Plus in tackling security challenges in our region. These principles will also help the ADMM as we work with other multilateral platforms and dialogues such as the East Asia Summit and the ASEAN Regional Forum. Our region has enjoyed substantial growth and prosperity for the past decades, and it continues to demonstrate tremendous potential and promise. As Prime Minister Najib says, there's too much to lose. To keep it that way, ASEAN must work together with other partners to strengthen our regional security architecture. Establishing key principles gives us a common starting point, while setting goals helps steer us in clear directions for the benefit of all of our people in ASEAN. Thank you very much for your attention.
The minister from Singapore, he obviously has been into so many meetings relating to ASEAN cooperation, whether it's military or non-military, whatever. But it's clear that, like Singapore, many other countries in ASEAN have total confidence in our ability to take the trajectory to go forward. Despite the fact that there are new problems, political leaders are in a position to, on the basis of the networking they've had and on the basis of the mutually reinforcing relationship between the neighbors of ASEAN, because of all that, it is possible for us to fix any issue that may come our way. This may be a bold assessment, but not many ASEAN leaders would actually talk in the negative. It's up to you to examine this afterwards in the context of the structures, military structures, non-military structures, and ones that relate to the other stakeholders, the non-governmental actors. Now can we turn to Turkey and that theater? And may I invite the Minister of Defense, Deputy Minister of Defense of Turkey.
Teşekkür ediyorum Sayın Başkanım.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Değerli bakanlar, hanımefendiler, beyefendiler ve kıymetli konuklar, ben de hepinizi saygıyla ve muhabbetle selamlıyorum.
Distinguished ministers, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, first of all, I would like to greet each and every one of you.
Öncelikle bu yıl dördüncüsü icra edilen Putrajaya forum kapsamında siz kıymetli konuklara hitap etme fırsatı bulduğundan duyduğum memnuniyeti ifade etmek istiyorum.
First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for the opportunity to address you, esteemed guests, on the occasion of the 4th Putrajaya Forum, and extend my greetings to each and every one of you.
Ve dost ve kardeş ülke Malezya'da bulunmaktan duyduğum onuru ve memnuniyeti ifade etmek istiyorum.
And I would like to say that I'm very honored to be here in this sister and friend country of Malaysia.
Bugün icra edilmekte olan çok başarılı organizasyondan dolayı ve bu organizasyonu yürütenlerin yaptığı katkılardan dolayı emek veren herkesi yürekten kutluyorum.
I would like to congratulate you for the organization of this event, and I would like to congratulate those who have contributed to the success of this forum.
Konuşmamın esasına girmeden Sayın Başkanımın özellikle Türkiye'ye yönelik yaptığı değerlendirmeler üzerinden bir iki hususu paylaşmak istiyorum.
I would like to share with you some of my thoughts on the occasion of the comments made by the chairperson on our country.
Türkiye yaklaşık 30 yıldır terörle yoğun bir mücadele veriyor.
Turkey has been combating terrorism very intensely for the last 3 decades.
Ve bu mücadele Türkiye'nin büyük kararlılıkla, insan merkezli olarak, özgürlük ve güvenlik dengesini gözeterek yürütmüş olduğu çok kapsamlı ve kararlı bir terörle mücadele yöntemidir.
In Turkey, we have a very comprehensive combat against terrorism, considering the human as a basis, and we are trying to strike a balance between freedom and security, and we are being very decisive in our combat.
Ama terör Türkiye'ye çok ağır faturalar ödetti. Bir taraftan çok yüksek rakamlarla ifade edilen ekonomik maliyetle birlikte insan kaynağı yönünden de büyük acılar yaşadık ve büyük tecrübeler gördük.
However, Turkey paid very high prices because of terrorism. On the one hand, we had great financial loss. On the other hand, we lost many people, many humans as a terrible tragedy.
Ancak ilk günden ve ilk andan itibaren Türkiye bir tavrı ve bir duruşu hiçbir tereddüte, hiçbir ikircikli tavra uğramadan çok kararlılıkla ortaya koydu.
However, Turkey never hesitated to make decisions in the fight against terrorism. She never counted a single penny.
Terörün kaynağı ne olursa olsun ve terör saldırısı kimden gelirse gelsin, ister dini, ister mezhebi, ister etnik, ister siyasal, bütün terör kötüdür ve bütün terör unsurları insanlık düşmanıdır.
No matter where it comes from, be it ethnical, be it sectorial, be it for other reasons, terrorism is bad and it's against humanity.
İyi terörist, kötü terörist yoktur.
There is no good terrorist or bad terrorist.
Ve bütün terör topyekün insanlığı tehdit eden bir gerçekliktir.
And all terrorist activities target human beings.
Terör bugün bizim kapımızda ve 30 yıldır onunla korakor dişe diş mücadele ediyoruz.
Terrorism is something that we have been fighting against for the last 3 decades very intensely.
Ancak hiç kimse emin olmasın. Terör her an herkesin kapısını çalabilir. Uzak Asya, Yakın Asya, Kuzey, Güney, Doğu, Batı farkı gözetmeksizin terör bir gün herkesin kapısını çalabilir.
Terrorism can happen anywhere. Nobody should feel himself safe or free from terrorism. It can be the Far Asia, Near Asia, North, West or South and East. It can come from everywhere.
Onun için terörizmle mücadele ederken kategorik bir yaklaşım ortaya koymadan samimi olarak, kararlılıkla ve terörün bütün unsurlarına karşı aynı kararlı yaklaşım içerisinde mücadele etmek bütün dünyanın görevidir.
Therefore, it is the responsibility and duty of the whole world to fight against terrorism without being any categoric. We need to be sincere and decisive in our combat when combating all the elements of terrorism.
Ve bugün biz Türkiye olarak bir başka problemle, terörizmin azdırdığı başka bir gerçeklikle daha mücadele ediyoruz. O da Suriyeli mülteciler problemidir.
As Turkey, in addition to terrorism, we are also dealing with another problem which is caused by terrorism as well, that is the Syrian refugees.
Suriye'de şiddetten kaçan Suriyeli insanların 2011 yılı Nisan'ından beri Türkiye'ye girişini bütün dünya takip etmektedir. Ve biz bu konuda açık kapı politikası uyguluyoruz ve uygulamaya devam ediyoruz.
As we all know, people living in Syria has been escaping the violence that is happening in their country since April 2011. And in this regard, we are applying an open door policy.
Ve biz Suriyeli sığınmacılara sağlık, eğitim ve tercümanlık dahil olmak üzere her türlü sosyal yardım yaparak büyük bir insanlık dersi veriyoruz.
And actually, we are providing healthcare, training, and education services to all the Syrian refugees by opening our doors. We are providing them with all the social facilities we can.
Ve bugüne kadar Suriyeli sığınmacılar için Türkiye'nin yapmış olduğu harcamaların toplam tutarı 10 milyar dolardır.
And so far, Turkey has spent a total of $10 billion for the Syrian refugees.
Uluslararası toplum bu konuda yeterince harekete geçmemiş ve bizi bu ciddi problemle mücadele noktasında büyük oranda yalnız bırakmıştır. Uluslararası toplum bu konuda üzerine düşenin gereğini yerine getirememiştir. Yeterince gayret ve yardım içerisinde bulunamamıştır.
Unfortunately, the international community could not respond to this crisis in an efficient manner, and they could not help in an efficient manner.
Bütün bunlarla birlikte bölgede giderek artan bir tehdit algısının kapsamlı olarak gündeme geldiği bütün taraflarca yakından takip edilmektedir.
In addition to that, the threat perceptions and the change of threat perceptions is very well known by all the parties.
Ve uluslararası tehdit algılamasında da ciddi bir kapsamlı dönüşüm yaşanmaktadır.
And also there has been an extensive transformation in the regional and international threat perceptions.
Güvenlik ve savunma alanında diyalog ve işbirliğine en çok ihtiyaç duyduğumuz bu dönemde Malezya'nın ev sahipliğinde düzenlenen Putrajaya forumunun önemli işlevi yerine getirdiği kanaatindeyiz.
We believe that the Putrajaya Forum hosted by Malaysia in this period of time, when we are more and more in need of dialogue and cooperation in the fields of security and defense, plays an important role.
İnsanlık tarihindeki en hızlı dönüşümlerin yaşadığı bu dönem uluslararası dengeleri de temelden sarsmaktadır.
This era of fast transformations that we are passing through in the history of humanity strongly distorts the international balance.
Asya'nın nüfus büyüklüğü, gayri safi yurt içi hasıla, askeri harcama ve teknolojik yatırım açısından önümüzdeki 20 yıl içinde Batı dünyasının önüne geçmesi beklenmekte, ekonomik güç merkezi kuzeybatıdan güneydoğuya doğru kaymaktadır ve yeni güç merkezleri ortaya çıkmaktadır.
Together with the contribution, it's expected that Asia will surpass the Western world in terms of population size, gross domestic product, military spendings and technological investments in the next 2 decades, just as the economic center of power is shifting from northwest to southeast.
Diğer taraftan Kuzey Afrika, Orta Doğu ve Arap Yarımadası'ndaki ülkelerin bir kısmında yaşanan ve birbirini etkileyen sosyal, siyasal çalkantılar ile iç çatışmalar devlet yapılarını tahrip etmekte, bir kısım sınırları belirsiz hale getirmekte, gruplar, ülkeler ve güç merkezleri arasındaki rekabeti dolayısıyla istikrarsızlığı artırmaktadır.
On the other hand, interactive social and political turmoil and internal conflicts experienced in some countries in North Africa, Middle East and Arabian Peninsula are destroying the state structures, rendering some political borders indistinctive, increasing the competition among the groups, countries and centers of power, which eventually brings along instability.
Dünyada yaşanan bu değişim ve gelişmeler ışığında karar vericilerin üzerlerine düşen sorumluluğun gereğini yerine getirmek suretiyle atacakları adım karar vericiler açısından en önemli sınav olarak ortada durmaktadır.
The most significant duty and the test for the decision makers today is to keep up with the pace of this changing environment and developments taking place in the world and to take timeless steps.
Böyle bir ortamda gelişmeler, uluslararası yasallık, karşılıklı ekonomik bağımlılık, insan haklarına saygı ve sürdürülebilir bir çevre politikasıyla farklı dini ve etnik kökene mensup kişiler arasında uyumun, kalıcı barış, istikrar ve refahın tesisi bakımından önümüzdeki dönemin en önemli ihtiyaçları olduğunu bizlere göstermekte ve uluslararası dinamiklerin küresel barış ve doğru araçlarla tahlil edilmesini de zorunlu kılmaktadır.
Events taking place in such an atmosphere show us that international legality, reciprocal economic dependence, respect for human rights, a sustainable environmental policy, and harmony among individuals from different religions and ethnicities are the crucial needs of the forthcoming era for the establishment of long-lasting peace, stability, and prosperity. Therefore, it becomes inevitable that international dynamics should be analyzed through a perspective of global peace with correct tools.
Fırtınalı havada meçhule doğru sürüklenen bir gemiyi andıran böylesi bir dünyada ülkeler savunma yapılarını gözden geçirmekte, savunma örgütlerinin önemi ve ortak tehdit algılamalarına sahip ülkeler arasındaki işbirliğini artırmaktadır.
In such a world resembling a vessel drifting to the unknown in a stormy weather, the countries are revising their defense structures, and there is an increasing trend in the importance attached to defense organizations and cooperation among countries with common threat perceptions.
Değerli konuklar, devlet kaynaklı destekli tehditlerin yanı sıra terörizm, insan kaçakçılığı, kitle imha silahlarının yaygınlaşması gibi yasa dışı faaliyetlerden kaynaklanabilecek asimetrik riskler, kaynakların paylaşılması mücadelesinde ekonomik alana ve sosyal yapıya dönük risklerle çevresel felaketler, tehdit ve risk yelpazesini oluşturan yaklaşım içerisinde daha da genişlemektedir.
Asymmetric risks that may arise from illegal activities such as terrorism, human trafficking, spread of weapons of mass destruction, and risks emerging in economic field and social structure in the struggle of sharing resources and environmental disasters, as well as state-led supported threats, further extend the range for risks and threats.
Küreselleşme, güvenlik alanındaki karşılıklı etkileşimi de kolaylaştırmaktadır. Mahalli krizler, bölgesel krizlere, bölgesel krizler de küresel krizlere doğru evrilmektedir. Bu durum kaçınılmaz olarak ülkeleri kendi bölgelerinin yanı sıra diğer bölgelerdeki potansiyel kriz alanlarını da duyarlı hale getirmektedir.
Globalization facilitates interaction in the field of security as well. Local crises can easily get regional, and regional crises can get local. This inevitably makes the countries sensitive to potential crises not only in their region but also in the other ones.
Değerli konuklar, hepimizin yakından gözlemlediği üzere Asya-Pasifik bölgesi son yarım asırda kayda değer sosyal ve ekonomik kalkınmasıyla dünyada önemli bir güç ve çekim merkezi haline gelmiştir.
Dear guests, as we all witness, the Asia-Pacific region has become an important center of power and attraction in the world in the last half century with its remarkable social and economic development.
Japonya ve Güney Kore'nin başarılı ekonomik atılımının ardından Malezya'nın da içinde bulunduğu Güneydoğu Asya ülkeleriyle Çin ve Hindistan'ın da yükselen ekonomiler arasına girdiğini yakından müşahede etmekteyiz.
Following the successful economic leap of Japan and South Korea, the Southeast Asian countries, including Malaysia, together with China and India, are among the emerging economies.
Asya'nın yükselişinin sürdürülebilir bir kalkınmaya dönüşmesi, sağlam ve kapsayıcı bir bölgesel ve güvenlik mimarisinin inşasını gerekli kılmaktadır.
Turning the rise of Asia into sustainable development requires a robust and comprehensive regional security architecture.
İstikrarsızlık, belirsizlik ve çatışmanın yükselişin bu itici gücü olan ekonomik ve ticari ilişkileri tehdit edeceği kuşkusuzdur.
There is no doubt that instability, uncertainty, and conflict will threaten economic and commercial relations, which are the locomotives of this rise.
Güneydoğu Asya bölgesi, genç ve dinamik nüfusu, Hint ve Pasifik okyanusları arasındaki stratejik konumları, bölge dışından dikkatleri üzerine toplamıştır.
The Southeast Asia region has attracted the attention of those outside the region with its young and dynamic population and strategic position between the Indian and Pacific Oceans.
Söz konusu ilgi ve yönetim, ABD'nin yanı sıra Japonya, Hindistan, Rusya, Avustralya ve genel olarak Avrupa Birliği'nin yakın dönemdeki dış politikalarına da yansımaktadır.
This attention and trend are also reflected in recent foreign policies of not only the USA, but also Japan, India, Russia, Australia, and the European Union in general.
Asya'ya yönelim. Önemli fırsatları barındırmakla birlikte bazı riskleri de taşımaktadır. Ekonomik refah ve kalkınmanın itici gücü olan uluslararası ticari bağların yoğunlaştırılması ve kesintisiz devam etmesi, bölgesel güven ve istikrarın korunması sorumluluğunu da beraberinde getirmektedir.
This trend towards Asia brings along some important opportunities as well as some risks. Intensifying and sustaining international commercial ties, which are the drivers of economic welfare and development, necessitates the responsibility for maintaining regional security and stability.
Değişen bölgesel ve uluslararası güvenlik ortamında nükleer silahlanmanın önlenmesi, çatışmaların barışçı yollarla çözülmesi ve çözümlenmesi ve küresel terörizmle mücadele ortak hareket etmemizi gerekli kılmaktadır.
In the atmosphere of changing regional and international security, prevention of nuclear armament, peaceful settlement of conflicts, and fighting against global terrorism require us to act together.
Avrupa'da NATO'nun sağladığı güvenlik ağına benzer bir bölgesel ittifakın Asya-Pasifik'te mevcut olmaması, bölgesel güvenlik mimarisinin inşasında bölgedeki tüm ülkelerin sorumluluk paylaşılmasını gerektirmektedir.
As there is no regional alliance similar to the security network in Europe provided by NATO in the Asia-Pacific region, all the countries in the region should share responsibility in the establishment of a regional security architecture.
Saygıdeğer konuklar, Türkiye, Balkanlar, Kafkasya ve Orta Doğu'nun kesiştiği noktada fevkalade önemli, bir o kadar da istikrarsız ve güvenlik ihtiyaçlarının sürekli etkin ve güncel tutulması gereken bir bölgede yer almaktadır.
Esteemed guests, Turkey is situated in an extremely important region at the crossroads of the Balkans, Caucasia, and the Middle East, but at the same time, it is a region suffering from instability, requiring continuous update of effective security needs.
Türkiye, küresel rekabetin yoğun olarak yaşandığı Afro-Avrasya bölgesinin merkezinde, kuzey-güney ve doğu-batı eksenlerindeki jeostratejik etkileşimlerin tesirlerine açık, kritik bir coğrafyada bulunmaktadır.
Turkey is situated at the center of the Afro-Eurasian region, where global competition is intensely present, in a critical zone open to the effects of geostrategic interactions in the north-south and east-west axis.
Ortaya çıkan istikrarsız ortamda daha geniş bir hareket alanı bulan radikal terörist grupların faaliyetleri ise bir taraftan bölgedeki bir kısım siyasi sınırları belirsiz hale getirmiş, diğer taraftan Avrupa'yı da kapsayan geniş bir coğrafyada terör algısını yükselterek Batı dünyasının Müslüman topluluklarla ilişkilerini olumsuz etkilemeye başlamıştır.
The actions of radical terrorist groups who have found a vast field of movement in the emerging unstable environment, on the one hand, rendered some of the political borders in the region indistinctive, and on the other hand, it started to negatively affect the relations of the Western world with the Muslim communities, elevating the perception of terror in a vast geographical area, including Europe.
Demin de ifade ettiğim gibi düzensiz göç olgusu hem Türkiye'yi hem de Avrupa ülkelerini açık tehdit alanı haline getirmiştir.
As I said before, irregular migration actually rendered both Turkey and other countries as the countries and destinations open for threats.
Küreselleşme ile artan ve mahiyeti gün geçtikçe çeşitlenen risk ve tehditler ile ülkelerin tek başına mücadele etmesi neredeyse imkansız hale gelmiştir.
It is almost impossible for the countries in this globalized world to act and combat terrorism alone.
Bu nedenle Türkiye birçok uluslararası işbirliği mekanizmasında yer almakta ve barışı destekleme görevlerine uluslararası yükümlülükleri, milli menfaatleri, imkan ve kabiliyetleri çerçevesinde azami oranda iştirak etmektedir.
For that reason, Turkey has been participating with all her capacity to the international peacekeeping operations and all the other efforts spent to this end.
Bu süreçte bölgemizde güçlü olmak, barış ve istikrar ülkesi olmak her zamankinden daha önemli olmaktadır. birçok ülkeyle kara ve deniz sınırları olan ülkemizin çevresinde ateşten bir çember bulunmaktadır.
Therefore, we need to be strong in all of our borders, in land and maritime borders, and Turkey is situated actually in a circle of fire in that sense.
Uluslararası terörizm, etnik ve mezhepsel çatışmalar gibi risk ve tehditlerin bulunduğu bir coğrafyada yer alan Türkiye'nin bölgesindeki istikrarsızlık ve belirsizlik ortamında risk ve tehdit odakları üzerinde caydırıcı etki sağlayarak ülke güvenliğini sağlaması, aynı zamanda bölgemizdeki anlaşmazlıkların barışçı yollarla çözümü, gerginliğin azaltılması, bunların silahlı çatışmaya dönüşmesinin önlenmesi ve mütecavizin sınırlanmasında Türk Silahlı Kuvvetlerimizin her zaman hazır olması, güvenlik stratejimizin en önemli unsurlarından birini oluşturmaktadır.
Having the Turkish armed forces ready at all times to ensure the security of the country by having a dissuasive impact on the risks and threats in the environment of instability and uncertainty in this geographical area, hosting risks and threats such as international terrorism, ethnic and sectarian conflicts, as well as to have peaceful settlement of disputes in the region, to relieve the tension, to prevent them from developing into armed conflicts, or to limit the aggressors, is one of the crucial elements of our security strategy.
Tehditlerin gittikçe hız kazandığı bu süreçte Türkiye savunduğu evrensel değerler ve kalıcı değerleriyle ulusal çıkarlar arasında kurduğu dengeyi bölgesinde ve ötesinde yapıcı bir rol oynama kararlılığını sürdürmektedir.
Turkey is determined to play a constructive role in her region and beyond within the balance that we have achieved between the universal and long-lasting values that we defend and our national interests.
Bu yaklaşım ve çabaların neticesinde Türkiye bugün giderek artan imkan ve yetenekleriyle bölgesinde genişleyen bir barış ve refah çemberi kurmayı hedefleyen, istikrar ve güvenlik üreten, refahın, beşeri ilerlemenin ve kalıcı istikrarın önünü açacak bir düzenin kurulması yolunda ciddi çabalar harcayan öncü bir ülke haline gelmiştir.
As a result of this approach and efforts, Turkey has become a leading country aiming to establish a growing circle of peace and prosperity in her region with her increasing potentials and capabilities, providing stability and security, spending great efforts to establish an order that would pave the way for prosperity, human development and long-lasting stability.
Türkiye'nin köklü devlet ve demokrasi geleneği, tarih ve coğrafyadan kaynaklanan avantajları, genç ve eğitimli nüfusu, dinamik ekonomisi bu politikada başarılı olmasında anahtar role sahiptir.
The deep-rooted state and democracy tradition of Turkey, her advantages stemming from history and geography, young and productive population and dynamic economy are the key factors in our success in this policy.
Diğer taraftan Türkiye, büyük önem atfettiği transatlantik ilişkiler çerçevesinde hem ABD hem de Avrupa ilişkileriyle ilişkilerini kuvvetlendirmekte, her biriyle yakın ilişkileri, ayrıca tarihi ve kültürel bağlarının bulunduğu Balkanlar, Orta Doğu ve Kuzey Afrika, Güney Kafkasya, Güney Asya ve Orta Asya ülkeleriyle ilişkilerini daha da geliştirmektedir.
On the other hand, Turkey is strengthening her relations with both USA and European countries within the framework of transatlantic relations that are deemed highly important, and Turkey furthers her relations with the countries in the Balkans, Middle East, and North Africa, South Caucasia, South Asia, and Central Asia, which she has close relations and historical and cultural ties with.
Ülkemiz bütün dünyanın dikkatini çeken, insanı odak noktasına koyan dış politikasıyla krizler ve çeşitli risklerle çevre bölgesinde istikrar, güvenlik ve müreffeh bir gelecek umudunun başlıca aktörüdür.
Turkey is an actor of hope for a stable, secure and prosperous future in the region surrounded by crisis and various risks.
Neticede Türkiye dış siyasetini Ulu Önder Mustafa Kemal Atatürk'ün yurtta sulh, cihanda sulh ilkesi temelinde geniş ve yapıcı bir vizyonla ve sahip olduğu tüm imkanlardan azami surette yararlanarak hayata geçirmektedir.
At the end of the day, Turkey is putting her foreign policy in practice on the basis of the principle of peace at home, peace in the world of our great leader Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, with an extensive and constructive vision, taking full advantage of all the opportunities we have.
Değerli bakanlar, hanımefendiler, beyefendiler ve kıymetli konuklar. Sözlerime son verirken, Putrajaya Forum'un düzenlenmesinde emeği geçen ve bu başarılı organizasyona katkı sağlayan herkese bir kez daha teşekkür ediyor ve tebriklerimi sunuyorum.
Esteemed ministers, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, at the end of my remarks, I would like to once again thank and congratulate those who spent efforts in the organization and contributed to the success of the Putrajaya Forum.
Forumun gerek bölgesel, gerekse küresel konuların üst düzey katılımcılarının bir araya gelerek fikir alışverişinde bulunmasına imkan sunarak küresel barış ve istikrara katkı sağlayıcı olan yancımı tam olduğunu belirtmek istiyorum. Hepinize teşekkür ediyorum, saygılar sunuyorum.
I would like to say that I strongly believe that the forum will serve the global peace and stability by facilitating the exchange of information by high-level participants on both regional and global issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. You speak representing a country that is very experienced in diplomacy and experienced in taking care of its national interests. You do show concern about what is happening in that part of the world and those issues flooding over to other areas. You mentioned terrorism as a menace that has to be countered. I mean, we also are very much aware of the extent and depth of damage that terrorism can inflict in our part of the world. I agree with you that Turkey has been able to play a very important role. In fact, when I was much younger than I fully admired the dynamism and versatility of Turkish foreign policy postulations. I'm going to present the positions of these two ministers to all now. We have something like until 5 o'clock to deal with question and answers. The acoustics is not very good as far as my old tired ears are concerned, but maybe you do better. But can we have questions from the floor? Not necessarily questions because we have time. This is supposed to be a dialogue. So I would allow for some detailing of your positions to the extent that people will get interested in your questions, and we can then pose these questions and these positions to the two ministers up here. Thank you. May I have anything from the floor, any questions from the floor, please? Yes, please.
Hello. Councillor, if I may begin.
Oh, yeah, please.
Sorry to connect from that. Now, I'm Mahdi from one of the major defense industry player, defense technology in fact. Now, being in a payroll of a defense industry player, I would love to see an ever increasing in defense spending, because that will mean ultimately good business for us. I mean, pragmatic about it. Now, but in the context of this regional cooperation within the ASEAN region, I would like to elicit comments from both ministers. Now, if there is a continuous increase in defense spending, does that not reflect a partial failure of all the attempts and efforts put in addressing the regional cooperation in addressing the security challenges? comment, please. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Do increasing defense budgets partially reflect the failure in state-to-state? That's a view of academics. That's a view for academics to espouse, but let me give the facts. ASEAN and Asia in general, defense spending has exceeded that of Europe in absolute terms, I think last 2 years. That in itself is not, in my view, a sign that there's instability. I think it's a reflection of a number of factors, namely, of course, is that for the last decade or even two, economic growth in ASEAN in Asia has been very good. And as economies modernize, their militaries, just like other organizations within states, want to modernize new equipment driven by technology. Against that, it's in absolute size of just physical numbers. The size of militaries have come down, and they're more efficient, more productive. But this is what concerns me, that unlike Europe, which has a shared history of both protracted wars, large wars, mechanisms and platforms which allow cooperation, dialogue, and if you like, resolution of disputes. ASEAN and Asia as a whole does not have the equivalent structures. So I think that that's, to me, is something that needs to be addressed. The quicker, the better. And that's why I think platforms like the ADMM, East Asian Summit, the ASEAN Regional Forum are important platforms for us to build those mechanisms.
Güvenlik harcamalarının artışı ile ilgili olarak birkaç şey söylenebilir. Evet, doğru, güvenlik harcamaları artıyor ve bütçelerden bu fasıllara aktarılan miktarlar yükseliyor. Burada birçok sebep var. Sayın Bakan'ın da gayet güzel ifade ettiği gibi tarihsel süreç içerisinde yapılan yanlışlar var. Ancak tehdit ve risk artışına bağlı, tehdit çeşitlemesi, risk analizi yaparak ülkeler bu konuda pozisyonlarını yeniden gözden geçiriyorlar. Kabul edelim ki özellikle Türkiye savunma harcamaları ile ilgili olarak demin konuşmamda da ifade ettim. Yaklaşımını barışı destekleyen ve caydırıcılık unsuru üzerinden yapmaya çalışıyor. Ancak bunu yaparken bile savunma harcamalarının arttığı bir gerçek. Bölgesel problemlerin çözümü için ve dünya genelindeki problemlerin çözümü için daha fazla katkı sağlamak gerekir ve bunu bir süreç olarak görmek lazım. Bir süreç olarak değerlendirmek lazım. Dolayısıyla bugünden yarına sonuç alabileceğimiz bir mesele olarak görülmesi doğru olmaz. Sayın Bakan da ifade ettiği gibi tehdit arttıkça, tehdit algılaması arttıkça daha fazla dayanışma ve işbirliği gerekir ve bundan da hiç vazgeçmemek gerekir. Teşekkür ediyorum.
Well, I would like to say a couple of things on the security spendings or spendings made for security. First of all, yes, the spendings on security have been increased, and the allocations that are made for security and defense are increased in number when you look at the budgets. As the distinguished minister said, there can be a couple of reasons for that, and one may be the historical mistakes. But on the other hand, threats and risks are increasing as well. Therefore, we see that countries are making analysis of this situation, and they are revising their positions as a country. When we look at the defense spendings of Turkey, as I said in my talk, our approach is based on peacekeeping and being dissuasive. But despite that fact, we still have increases in our defense spendings. When we look at the regional and international problems, we are trying to find the solutions, but still, this is a process. We need to have that point of view. Therefore, this is not something that we can overcome in an overnight. That will not be a correct approach. As the threats increase, we need more and more solidarity and cooperation.
Thank you. An interest to follow up on that question after the answers? No. Is that? All right. We, we may well come back to this question of regional defense later. Somebody would be bound to ask this kind of question again. Can I take another question, please?
Tan Sri?
Yes.
Tan Sri? Over here.
Yes.
Azmi Hassan from UC Technology Malaysia. Dr. Ng, I just cannot help it. I got a feeling that you are not that happy with ADMM after a decade. Last November, the last meeting of ADMM in Kuala Lumpur, a general consensus cannot be reached. I'm not sure what happened in that meeting, but since Datuk Sri Syamuddin is not here, the chairman, for the last meeting, can you explain what happened in that particular meeting where general consensus cannot be reached? Thank you.
I think you're referring to not so much that the general consensus was not reached, but there was no consensus on one particular issue. In fact, there was consensus on a multitude of aspects which we came out as either not necessary in that meeting, but prior to meetings. But I know how the real world works. You know, you study for a test, and you get 11 questions right, but one wrong, and people focus on the wrong one. But let me bring back our attention to the larger picture. Not so much episodic meetings of what we can achieve, what we cannot achieve. If you're talking about the South China Sea, nobody here believes that you can solve the issue of sovereignty even within our generation. I think Deng Xiaoping was very wise. Leave it to the next generation. And if you were a wise leader of this generation, you would have said, leave it to the next generation. But there are issues that can be solved. For instance, I think you have to break it down. Fisheries agreements, I think, are within reach. I can cite you Taiwan and Japan that took many years, but eventually signed a fisheries agreement. Fishermen are not, I stand corrected, I haven't seen, I don't know what modern trawlers are, but I assume within the South China Sea, some of the fishing boats don't have radars and GPS, and sometimes they say they follow the fish, and there are no clear borders, and they cross it. But the larger point is, if we can work a fisheries agreement, I think it would reduce tensions. Issues of sharing of hydrocarbon reserves is an area rich for win-win solutions. Sovereignty, I think, is probably the highest hurdle and probably won't be solved. And sometimes politically it's impossible for some governments to bring issues of sovereignty to the courts, if you like, The Hague or wherever the appropriate jurisdiction is. I think there may be more instances in the future where we can't agree to agree. We may feel that it's better not to say that we agreed to disagree. And so this is the real world. But has there been progress? I would say yes. Are we still engaged in jaw-jaw? Yes. And should we continue to do this? Yes. But the substantive piece of instrument that we really ought to be chewing the bit on is the code of conduct. That gives a very clear way for all countries, for South China Sea, to be able to move forward. And I would remind astute members here that the Declaration of Conduct, which was signed by both ASEAN leaders and Chinese leaders, was not a document of motherhood statements. There were clear articles in terms that prescribe behavior, and we really ought to get back to the Declaration of Conduct in terms of norms and practices if we are to use tensions at sea.
Thank you.
So, I thoroughly support what the Minister said, that there have been nuances of progress on some aspects of our sharing of exploitation of resources in South China Sea. It is not all bleak. Any questions? Any more questions? Yes, please. Your turn now. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much to both the speakers for sharing your perspective and views on your respective topics. And thank you also for the moderator to actually allow me to get away from the scope of the presentation. I would like to touch on the theme or topic of this afternoon, which is major power influence and regional security architecture. It is acknowledged that ASEAN remains the central and platform or mechanism in promoting security and stability in this region. It is reflected well in the like of ADMM, ADM Plus, and the ARF, where ASEAN actually the central mechanism or central platform. But notwithstanding that, I think generally the presence of major powers in this region is generally welcome and viewed positively by members of ASEAN as also contributing to the regional peace and security. And it's also apparent that the major powers outside of ASEAN has in themselves their own influence, and which has the unwelcome potential of causing split or divide within ASEAN. How would you suggest that the major powers play their role and use their influence to actually strengthen or enhance the solidarity and also the centrality of ASEAN? Use it positively, and on the other hand, what should ASEAN do to enhance and also not to be influenced by the outside major power? Thank you very much.
I think Chief Tawi has made a very significant point. I made the point that while Asia's military spending has exceeded Europe, that we did not have institutional traditions or national consciousness equivalent of the European never again moment that was scarred by 2 major world wars. With one qualification: there is a never a moment consciousness among ASEAN. And that never again consciousness that resonates among ASEAN members is never again should we be a proxy playground for major powers. Because we saw the devastation it did in the 60s, the 70s. Prior to that, whether it was the East Indies, the Dutch, the Portuguese. But the decolonization period has been relatively short. Brunei, for example, the last country in ASEAN to gain independence, was less than half a century ago. And he asked a pertinent question: how do we persuade major powers that it is to their interests that ASEAN, one, collectively remains independent, and 2, ASEAN member states continue to maintain their sovereignty? We live in a real world. The facts on the ground are that China is now the largest trading partner of every country in ASEAN, and also including Australia and New Zealand. The Chinese have said, you like to trade with us, but when it comes to security, you might choose some other partner. I think the answer to that question must be that it is indeed the interest for major powers, for ASEAN to, in its neutral stance, to continue to be in the driver's seat. And one has to be realistic. I expect that major powers will continue to have strategic rivalry and try to influence, if not ASEAN, individual member states of ASEAN. And it's to our collective interest and strength to see that ASEAN continues to maintain goals and principles which I talked about. Goals which I think it would benefit to everyone, including the major powers, that we continue to pursue common principles that we can all agree on.
Stephen Leong from University Tunku Abdul Rahman and visiting ISIS fellow. May I take advantage of the presence of the Honorable Minister from Turkey? If I may ask a question not necessarily related to defense spending and so on, I was very interested in that Turkey just last week hosted the OIC, and this was a meeting of the Muslim countries throughout the world coming to terms with major threats, priorities for world peace, particularly in that Middle East region. Could you, Honorable Minister, please comment on what are the priorities from outside looking at the situation there, that sectarianism is a major problem. How can the OIC resolve this? Thank you very much.
İslam İşbirliği Teşkilatı, ASEAN gibi ortaya çıkan mevcut tehditlere, risklere karşı hem bölgesel hem de dünya genelinde oluşacak barış ve güvenlik zemini için bir oluşum ve bunu böyle görmek lazım. Yani ASEAN'ın oluşma sürecindeki yaklaşımlar neyse büyük oranda İslam İşbirliği Teşkilatı ile ilgili olarak da böyle değerlendirmek lazım. Ve burada Sayın Cumhurbaşkanımızın Recep Tayyip Erdoğan Bey'in de ifade ettiği gibi biz Türkiye olarak mezhepçi bir yaklaşımı, anlayışı sorunlu bir anlayış olarak kabul ediyoruz. Ve bunu da bölge açısından bu yaklaşımı bir tehdit olarak değerlendiriyoruz. Dolayısıyla da İslam İşbirliği Teşkilatı'nın mezhepçi yaklaşımları reddeden ve daha bütüncül, daha üst seviyede bir birlikteliği öngören yaklaşımını öne çıkarmasını önemsiyoruz ve bunun da bölge barışına, giderek de dünya barışına daha fazla katkı sağlayacağını düşünüyoruz. Güvenlikle alakalı olarak biz genel olarak da konuşmamda da ifade ettim. Bir defa terörizmi en büyük potansiyel tehdit olarak görüyoruz ve buna karşı da yoğun bir mücadele veriyoruz. Ancak terörizmi doğuran sorunların çözülmesini terörizmle mücadele açısından da önemli buluyoruz. Yani terörizm şüphesiz önemli bir alan ama terörü doğuran problemleri ve terörün kaynaklarını da irdeleyip doğduğu yerde engellemek ve ortadan kaldırmak da yaklaşım olarak bizim önemli üzerine durduğumuz meseleler. Dolayısıyla da bunu da Sayın Bakan'ın da ifade ettiği gibi biz bir süreç olarak değerlendiriyoruz. Bugünden yarına belki sonuç alabileceğimiz bir süreç olmayabilir ama hep umutla İslam İşbirliği Teşkilatı'nda olduğu gibi ASEAN'da ve diğer şeyler, NATO gibi kuruluşlar bu konuda hem bölgesel hem de dünya genelindeki güvenlik inşası için önemli katkılar sağlıyor ve bundan sonraki süreçte de sağlamaya devam edecek. Teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you very much for your question. Well, first of all, OIC is an organization established just like ASEAN in order to secure the regional and international peace and security against the current threats and risks. Therefore, when we look at the establishment of OIC, it can be regarded as similar to that of ASEAN. As our distinguished President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan said, in Turkey we accept this sectarian approach as a very problematic one. It is a threat for the region. And OIC also rejects these sectarian approaches, and it adopts a more holistic approach towards solidarity. Only by that means we can contribute to the regional and international peace. As I mentioned during my speech, we regard terrorism as a very big potential threat. Therefore, we are conducting a very intense combat against terrorism. However, when combating terrorism, we need to focus on the reasons that give rise to terrorism. We should not only fight against it, but also we need to prevent the reasons for the emergence of terrorism. Therefore, it's an important process, as the distinguished minister mentioned. It is not something that we can overcome in an overnight, but we always have the hope. And just like the ASEAN and NATO and OIC, we will contribute to the regional and international peace, and we believe that these types of organizations will always have the contribution to the establishment of security.
Thank you. You want to ask a further question? You're happy with that? All right. Okay, any other question? Not much has been made to compare the dimensions of terrorism in our part of the world and the dimension of terrorism in the Turkish part of the world. Are we not interested in making certain comparisons, certain notations? Some of the think tanks around here? No. No questions. All right.
Hello, sir.
Is that one? Okay, yes. Please, welcome.
Good day, sir. I'm Commander Chandra from Royal Malaysian Navy. Currently, I'm the directing staff of Malaysian Armed Forces Staff College. This question is basically from the academic perspective. Currently, we don't have a clear-cut definitions on terrorism, where everybody assume a definition based on their own perspective. And without having a clear-cut definition, it's quite difficult to create a theory on how to fight terrorism. And with so many incidents happening around us currently, can this forum somehow or other narrow down what is the best theory that we can have for today? Thank you.
Singapore's position, we take the threat from ISIS-related terrorism very seriously. And I'll give you just three reasons why we have said that. So in our presidential address in the opening of Parliament, it was topmost agenda item. And the reason is simple. In just sheer numbers, the number of sympathizers in this region that are sympathizing with ISIS compared to JI, for instance, there are more sympathizers in the last 3 years than in the 10 years, in the decade that Al-Qaeda and JI had influence. That's the first reason. The second reason is that the networks that are being formed may have greater stickiness. If you look at southern Philippines, if you look at Sulawesi, if you look at what PM Najib talked about, our young being won over, whether it's in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, the networks have affiliation, and in the recent Jakarta attack, purported handler Barum Naim in Iraq and Syria being able to initiate and, if you like, orchestrate attacks. So that's the second cause of concern. The third cause of concern is the return fighters. The return fighters, the numbers now are over 1,000 for both Malaysia, Indonesia and Singapore, come back with ideology, they come back with training, they come back with exposure, they come back with expertise. And on top of that, the number of detainees from the recent GI cells that were responsible for the Bali bomb blast are due for release. So we take it very seriously. Traditionally, I think militaries have not been geared up that much, and different countries have different structures. Most countries have your police that are frontline respondents. But I think in this battle against extremism, you have to fight it with intelligence, jointly with countries, and that's why Minister Hishamuddin and myself are very keen on stepping up intelligence with Indonesia as well, and with other partners such as the US, Australia, stepping up cooperation and collaboration, and internally gearing up our own militaries to be able to respond to deal with urban density threats. So I agree with you that there needs to be changes and that greater cooperation will assist us. But I think this threat is very real.
Can I ask you, Minister, are there discussions of this, are there this type of discussions held among ASEAN ministers collectively?
Indeed so. I mean, when we did issue the joint declaration, I think it was an agenda item, and we recognize this, that collectively we will have to deal with it. As I said, next month in May, 4 countries, Brunei, Singapore, New Zealand, and are hosting a counterterrorism and maritime security exercise. And this is the exercise that I was referring to, where we have 20 special forces that are groups that are participating, including ships from other countries. So we are, if you like, this is a priority item, and we recognize that we have to deal with this collectively.
Demin konuşmamda da ifade etmeye çalıştım. Terör kimden gelirse gelsin, hangi düşünceden, hangi gruptan, hangi yapıdan gelirse gelsin, bütün olarak mücadele edilmesi gereken bir gerçekliktir.
First of all, as I mentioned during my speech, terrorism is something that we need to fight against, no matter from whom it comes, or no matter what kind of opinion, group, or structure it is based on.
Terör yapan örgütlerin ve teröre yardımcı olan unsurların kendilerine göre gerekçeleri olabilir. Bunlar siyasi olabilir, etnik olabilir, mezhebi olabilir, dini olabilir ya da başka bir şey olabilir.
The terrorist organizations or those who assist terrorist organizations may have their own reasons, be it political, ethnical, or sectarial, or regional, or whatever reason they may come up with.
Hangi sebeple olursa olsun ve hangi gerekçeyle olursa olsun, terör kötüdür ve bütün insanlığı tehdit eden bir gerçekliktir ve terör nereden gelirse gelsin, hangi gerekçelerse yapılırsa yapılsın, bütün olarak ona karşı durmak ve istikrarlı bir mücadeleyle onunla mücadele etmek ve samimi bir şekilde mücadele etmek herkesin boynuna borçtur.
And no matter what the reason behind this, terrorism is bad. It is threatening humanity, and no matter what the rationale, what the reason behind that, we need to stand against as a whole with a holistic approach in a very consistent, persistent, and sincere manner.
Maalesef üzülerek ifade etmek isterim ki dünyanın çeşitli noktalarında terör olaylarla ilgili doğru olmayan yaklaşımlar var.
Unfortunately, I'm very sad to say that there are some incorrect approaches from various parts of the world regarding terrorism.
Türkiye'de olursa ya da Güney Asya'da olursa ya da farklı bir bölgede olursa onun şekli, mahiyeti, boyutları farklı. Başka bir coğrafyada olursa boyutları farklıdır diyemezsiniz.
You cannot say that if it happens in Turkey, South Asia, or in another region of the world, its content and form is different, and if it happens in another geographical area, it is completely different.
terörün bizzatihi kendisi insanlık dışıdır, gayrimeşrudur ve hiçbir ön şart ileri sürmeksizin herkesin mücadele etmesi gereken bir gerçekliktir.
Terrorism is against humanity, it is illegal, and it is something that we all should fight against without having any preconditions.
Dolayısıyla da bugün dünyanın bazı noktalarında özellikle terörle mücadele konusunda ikircikli tavır ortaya koyan ve çifte standart ortaya koyan yaklaşımları yüzlerek izliyoruz.
Therefore, in some parts of the world, we are facing some ambiguous approaches with double standards in the fight against terrorism. We are very sad to hear and see that.
Teröre ve terörizme kategorik yaklaşmak, iyi terörist ve kötü terörist olarak değerlendirmek yanlıştır ve bu bütün olarak insanlığa yönelik bir tehlikeli yaklaşım olarak ortaya çıkacaktır.
Having a categoric approach to terrorism, having an approach of good terrorist and bad terrorist is wrong, and it will be a wrongdoing against all humanity.
Biz Türkiye olarak Paris'te patlama olduğu zaman onu kendimize yapılmış gibi hissettik ve onun acısını duyduk.
When there were attacks in Paris, as Turkey, we felt the sadness, the grief in our hearts as if it happened to us.
Ancak üzülerek ifade etmem gerekir ki Türkiye'de, Ankara'da, İstanbul'da, Suruç'ta patlama olduğu zaman bütün dünya aynı yüreklilikle ve aynı cesaretle bunu söyleyemedi ve buradaki patlamalardan aynı hissiyatla bahsedemedi.
However, unfortunately, when the same attacks happened in Ankara, Istanbul, and Suruç in Turkey, we did not see the same courageous approach from the international community. We did not have the same feeling from the world.
Bu yaklaşım teröristi cesaretlendiren ve terörü dolaylı olarak cesaretlendiren yanlış bir yaklaşımdır.
This approach is wrong, and this approach is actually indirectly encouraging terrorism.
Onun için çifte standart uygulamaktan vazgeçmek ve bütün insanlığı topyekün tehdit eden bu ortak düşmana karşı kararlılıkla ve samimi olarak mücadele etmek gerekir.
Therefore, we need to give up this double standard approach, and we need to have a decisive approach and fight against terrorism, which is a common threat for the whole humanity.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, I would like to end at 5, if you don't mind. A couple of minutes before 5. Yes, please.
Thank you, Honorable Ministers. I'm Wing Commander Maposa from Zimbabwe. Economic development is a critical pillar to national and regional security, lack of which may result in non-traditional threats that may affect regional stability. I would like to know what ASEAN is doing to address disparities in economic development between its states. Thank you.
Well, I don't have all the facts about what our economic programs are, but I know that for Singapore, we have a number of platforms where we assist economic aid, and Singapore isn't very large, but we do have good programs where we train officials in governance, in civil service. So that's for Singapore. ASEAN, I cannot speak on behalf of the ASEAN community as a whole, and again, I don't have the facts in terms of what specific programs we have, but I know that we are members of joint development schemes with others, so I would refer that to you. But I would say that that's a question which I really don't have all the facts with me, because it talks about economic aid.
Thank you.
Good evening, Tan Sri. Tan Sri's comment just now on the relationship between Asia and the Middle East in sense of countering the threats of terrorism. Andrew Raj, visiting lecturer at Aksas Turkish naval base in Marmaris. And what we are seeing here is the Turkish government and the military is actually looking into working with the Malaysian counterparts on countering the threats of terrorism and piracy right now. I will be heading to Turkey next week, where I will lecture again at the naval base. And this is where we are actually sharing and kind of providing the training programs together with Turkey and with Malaysia. Thank you.
Tabii ben de bu vesileyle görüşümü ifade etmek istiyorum. Malezya, kültürel ve tarihi bağlarla bağlı olduğumuz dost ve müttefik bir ülke.
Taking this occasion, I would like to say a couple of words. Malaysia is a country where we have cultural and historical ties with.
Üstelik altını önemli çizerek ifade etmek istiyorum ki güvenilir bir müttefik.
And I would like to strongly emphasize that it is a very trustful and reliable ally for us.
Ve biz hem Malezya'yla ve aynı zamanda Malezya üzerinden ASEAN'la, Güney Asya'yla daha fazla işbirliği yapmak ve daha fazla birliktelik kurmak ve ortak tehdit algılaması olarak ortaya çıkan tehditlere karşı birlikte yol yürümek istiyoruz.
And both with Malaysia and with ASEAN, in that sense, we would like to have more cooperation with South Asia, and we would like to act together against the common threats and common threat perceptions.
Çünkü tehdit algılaması artmış ve çeşitlenmiştir.
Because the perception of threats has been elevated and we have more diversity in terms of these threats.
Artık bu sürece dahil olan devletlerden başka örgütler ve yapılar da söz konusudur.
Now, in addition to the states, we have more structures and organizations that are involved in this process.
Ve biz bu sebeple bölgesel sorunları çözmeye yönelik adım atan ASEAN gibi oluşumları destekliyoruz ve her alanda da işbirliğini artırarak devam ettirmek istiyoruz.
Therefore, we support the regional organizations such as ASEAN, and we would like to increase our support and cooperation in every field.
Teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, the two ministers, for their contribution this afternoon. Well done. I thank all the audience who has participated. I think this has been a good start for the Putrajaya Forum. We will meet you again tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will now invite Lieutenant General Dato' Azizan Magdalene, Chief Executive of MIDAS, to present mementos to the moderator and panel speakers. May we invite Tan Sri Razali Ismail. His Excellency Dr. Ng Eng Hen, and His Excellency Sue Alpay. Thank you, Dato'. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we have come to the end of our very first session today. We'd like to extend our heartiest thanks to our esteemed moderator and speakers, as well as all distinguished guests. Ladies and gentlemen, for your valued participation and support. Our session tomorrow will commence at 0900 hours in this ballroom, and we expect all participants to be here early. Please come in numbers. With that, we conclude today. Thank you.